Today, we're going to start exploring our last software of the course, which is going to be Revit. Now, Revit is a building information modeling software or a BIM software. And so, where Revit is really going to shine is that it knows you are making a building in comparison to our previous softwares that didn't know this. Um, Revit really started gaining popularity in around 2008 and has become a huge industry standard and is a software that most firms and most designers and architects are using. Some may opt for other software out there, like ArchiCAD is kind of like the next big one that people use for BIM, but Revit does kind of shine above all of them. Um, for many years, architects and engineers and other professionals have kind of pointed out some of the flaws in Revit, and we've shared our frustrations on many of message boards asking for help with things that we're trying to get done in our models, and just kind of, some even predicting, that Revit will become a thing of the past. Um, but yet, almost 2 decades later, it still is that industry standard, because Revit really remains the most complete BIM software that we have available today. Um, it for certainly does have limitations and has things that can be improved with it. And in each new release every year, they have been making improvements to the software. Um, but no other software out there really has managed to cover the full spectrum of design workflow and coordination of documents and collaborative abilities that Revit has been able to kind of work with. Um, so the real challenge with Revit, especially as a designer, as a user, the challenge is not so much of finding a perfect software, but rather learning how to use the software and adapt it to your design needs. So before we jump in to the software, if we kind of make a comparison to our previous two software we used, AutoCAD was this purely two-dimensional drafting software, truly. The CAD stands for either computer-aided design or computer-aided drafting. I really think of it as drafting because you're not doing a tremendous amount of design work in AutoCAD. AutoCAD has no idea what you're building. When you're making a floor plan, it didn't understand what you were making. It was just putting lines where you told it to put lines. SketchUp is a 3D modeling software, but it still, again, had really no idea what you were doing or making. It was just putting, shapes where you told it to put shapes and forms where you told it to put forms. Now, Revit is a BIM tool, which is building information modeling. And that information is going to be such an important factor within the software, as well as that building part, because Revit knows that you are creating a building, and therefore it knows the standards and requirements of how a building goes together and how that needs to be represented in a set of construction documents. So as we are creating our floor plan, Revit is intuitively thinking about what a wall is and how a wall is formed, in a way that AutoCAD and SketchUp couldn't do in there. And it really has this ability to work with this information to create our construction documents so much faster. Um, so we'll mainly use AutoCAD for just some two-dimensional drawing. We use SketchUp a lot for just quick conceptual massing models. We use Revit for information-based, really intelligent building models to expedite our construction documents. Um, Again, AutoCAD, we were just putting down lines and putting measurements down for those lines in there. Within SketchUp, we were just pushing and pulling or extruding our profiles into shapes. Um, Within Revit, we have that information, and so each thing we do has different settings or different parameters that are going to be involved with it, in order to create models so much faster. Now, the one of the issues with Revit is that Revit does have a little bit of a learning curve because of the fact that there's so much that it is capable of doing. It sometimes can seem a little overwhelming when starting out. And there are some like errors and warnings as we work that maybe while I'm working in the video, I might not get an error and you wind up getting one, but it's just because I have at this point now 16 years experience in this software. And so I have kind of gone over that learning curve and I know what to look out for to avoid errors where you starting out, maybe, you're not sure what you're doing first. But that's why I want to kind of just play around with the software today. So it does have a steeper learning curve compared to our other two software. Um, Another really great tool within Revit is it does have this collaborative feature. So if I'm working at a large firm, let's say I'm working, at Gensler, and um, there are a whole team of us working on a building, I don't have to wait until, John in the engineering department is done with the structure to work on maybe like the interior elevations of the building. We can be working in that same file at the same time and collaborate and get it done that much faster. Um, we could even be in, two completely different time zones, and we can still have this one shared model that we just kind of check out different parts or pieces in there. Um, Another wonderful thing that kind of helps us create our documents a lot faster is within those parameters and settings in our model, we have all of this different data that we can put in there or tag in there. So not only could I just say, or place my window in my floor plan. But within that window, I could put information about the manufacturer. I can put information about the materials. So that way I can now know the weight of that window. I can put in information about the R value of that window. So I can get like a good information about um, like how tight of a seal my building is going to have or my building envelope will have if I have all of this thermal information for all my materials. I could even say how much that window costs. I could even put in information about when that window is being delivered to the job site, at what phase during the job site is that window going to arrive in there and be installed. So we can put a tremendous amount of info in there to make our model really rich in this data and really help with project management. We won't do too much of that in this course because there's only so much we can do, but it is just a great feature. Um, and we can, of course, to get to our completed construction documents that much faster and really be way more adaptable to changes or change orders in our construction documents because of the fact that if we make one change throughout the entire model, it will update in all subsequent views. So if we think back to our three-room shed from AutoCAD, if I asked you to change the floor plan, like let's say I wanted the whole building to be 3 feet wider, and I also wanted the rooms to be 2 feet like deeper. So I wanted to change both horizontal and vertical floor plan measurements. Well, we would have to adjust our floor plan. We would have to adjust that foundation plan. We would have to adjust our two elevations we drew, and we would have to adjust that section. All of those views would have to get adjusted, and that would all be manual adjustments we'd have to make. In Revit, if I was to make a change in one view, it would update in all of those subsequent views in there as well. So if we make a change just somewhere in the model, it updates everywhere in that model, no matter what. Um, we can also, so we can really just get to those finished construction documents so much faster in there. Um, Really where kind of the con of Revit comes is it really requires some training. It's a little complex for a beginner to start off with. So that's why I'm going to try to ease you in with just some practices before we start doing anything that you'll really submit for a grade. Um, because I think it's really important to just kind of play and explore the software without necessarily the fear of a grade attached to it. Um, my biggest recommendation for those of you who want to get really good at Revit, and especially for those of you who are interior design majors or if you are an ATD, an architecture technology concentration within our building science program. For those two areas, I recommend finding buildings that already exist, buildings that you like or buildings that you're interested in, and recreating them in the software. And that's how you're really going to start building these different modeling skills and get really good, because you'll have new challenges that you'll have to approach and kind of troubleshoot and figure out. So the more buildings you practice making, the better you're going to get at designing your own buildings. For those of you on our construction management track in our building science program, I still recommend becoming pretty proficient in Revit, because it's going to help you so much more when communicating with architects about especially requirements or missing information within things like section details, or if you're looking for change order requests for specific materials, we can really then kind of find ways to opt for one way versus another, because it becomes an incredibly useful project management software too, if we take the time to really focus in on it. Um, so with all that in mind, I just want to, before we open up our little sample project I'll give you, just kind of look a little bit at our interface and how Revit kind of looks and works. So there's three main parts of Revit's user interface that we need to really focus on. One is our drawing canvas, which essentially is just going to be our view of whatever we're looking at. And it could be a 3D view, it could be a floor plan, it could be an elevation or a section or anything of the like. But it's really, think of it as our big infinite sheet of graph paper that we had in AutoCAD. That's kind of what our drawing canvas is in this software. The other two really important pieces of our interface are what we call our properties panel and our project browser. So our properties panel is going to tell us information and all those different parameters and settings associated with whatever we are looking at or whatever we have selected. And our project browser is how we can go from one view to another view in the software. And I have links just here, just a quick little tour of using that user interface. So if you wanted to pause my video to take some time to watch this video, absolutely please do. Now, when we first start Revit and we're opening with our home screen, it's going to have all of the various models that you have opened or worked on recently. As well as split kind of into the two categories of our two different file types. So we, again, have those two files that we can work with. We have models and we have families. Models, we can also think of models as projects or the buildings themselves. They are going to have a file extension of RVT for a Revit project. And it is just essentially just the building is going to be the model. Now, families are everything that we put into models. So families have a file extension of RFA, and they are the things that we put into models. So you'll see that under this little family of, in the screenshot, families I had used recently was a light switch plate, a single flush door, a stacked washer dryer, even the annotation of a window tag, and a single sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper. These were all different things that I loaded into a project. And it was actually this project here, a tiny home I was helping my friend put together for an Airbnb. But so these were just all different things that I was putting into that file there. Now, once you open up a file, and again, we'll get to it in a moment, we have kind of just our basic user interface. And so up at the very tippy top, no matter what view you're looking at, you have what's called this quick access toolbar. So this is kind of like in AutoCAD too. We have this same toolbar here. It's where we can save things pretty fast or make some changes, maybe do a quick export. We've got a couple of shortcuts here that we can just click that are just really common things we use, and it'll always just be there. Then we have our toolbar coming across the top, again, very similar to AutoCAD. And we have a few different tabs or a few different ribbons we can run through. So we have our architecture, our structural, then we have some tabs that I'll be honest, I don't ever really go in, so I'm not going to teach them to you, and some inserts and annotations and our sites. So just different ways that we can have different tools up at the top in our toolbar. Really, where you're going to spend a lot of your time is just in the architecture tab with these tools, because these are just our very basic modeling tools to create a building. Um, Anytime we have a tool that has the tiny little arrow underneath it, that means that there's different options available for it. So for instance, there's different types of ways we can make a roof other than just the standard roof tool. So think a little bit of AutoCAD had those same little arrows sometimes underneath tools in which we could open up other options in here. Now on the left side of our screen, we have our properties panel here highlighted in green and our project browser highlighted in purple. One thing I'm going to show you today is just another way to set up kind of your user interface. So I'll show you kind of how I like my Revit set up just to make it a little bit more comfortable for me to use and a little bit faster for me to use. But our properties bar is showing us information about whatever we have selected and the different parameters that we can set within there. So because in this particular screenshot, I have absolutely nothing selected, it's just telling me stuff related to my view. So it's telling me that I'm currently in a three-dimensional view and how much detail level I have going on in said view. And then I have different edit buttons or different settings I can set related to this view. And it even has this scroll bar. So if I was in Revit, I could scroll down and even look at other options and settings I could set. There are so many different parameters related to so many different objects in here. And really and truly, we are not going to be able to go over all of them. But the wonderful news is you are not going to be required to use all of them or know all of them in there. But there's going to be a lot that we use frequently in there. Now, our project browser underneath is our main way of switching between different views. And it's typically going to be organized into various view types. So we could switch into our floor plans or our elevation views or our section views or our sheets of paper by just double clicking within our project browser to switch between our various views in there. It can also be how we set up our sheets, which is kind of like Revit's version of AutoCAD's paper space, or those little model tabs we had down here in AutoCAD. And then we also have at the bottom of any view in our drawing canvas what's called the status bar. And so this has a lot of different like visibility features that we can quickly set for whatever view we currently have open or are looking at. Now, in a three-dimensional view, we have the ability to orbit ourselves around three-dimensionally. Our controls are the exact opposite of SketchUp, which is a little annoying, I will admit. So we will hold Shift and the scroll wheel to orbit, and we just use our scroll wheel to pan in this software. Additionally, in our 3D view, we can use this view cube up here to kind of click to snap to some views in a little bit of an expedited fashion. Now, in my next little screenshot here, I am looking at a floor plan. And again, we'll get into Revit in just a moment. You will play around in Revit too, I promise. But I was able to get into this floor plan view by just double clicking in the project browser. And I was able to go into my level 1 floor plan. So there's some things that my view has done automatically for me because of the fact that it knows what a floor plan is and how a floor plan looks or how it's supposed to look in here. Additionally, my properties panel for this floor plan looks different because I have clicked on this window. So if I clicked on this window, my properties panel is now telling me information about this window, what type of window it is, and what size it is. But then I have all of these different settings, or again, parameters that I can change to adjust this window in here. And I could even go further and make changes to it. Most of the time when you select something, your toolbar up at the top is going to adjust to this modify toolbar, in which it'll have various settings and things you could do to change or adjust it in there. And again, within our status bar down here, we can adjust things like our view scale and our detail level. So that way we can figure out how large things might appear when we're looking at them on paper. Now, you can really, again, where we get into that metadata of something, is we can go into our type parameters in our properties panel, and it's going to open up this window where we can make adjustments and change so many different things about whatever we have selected. Our parameters are going to vary based on what we have selected. So for instance, right now I have a window selected in the screenshot. So it has things about like what are my frame made out of, which is what is my trim made out of, what's the glass made out of, and like what's its size. Well, if I was to have selected a couch or something like that, my parameters are going to be different because couches and windows are two different things in there versus if I selected a wall or a roof. So the types of parameters we get are always going to depend on what kind of family we have selected in our model in there. So this is where we can really put a lot of that data in there for our models. Second to lastly, really, but before we jump into just looking at kind of our sample Revit file, what's this little line here doing? There we go. Oh, I guess I was blocking out his thing because I have my own little one. But I want to talk about Revit shortcuts. So every keyboard shortcut in Revit is a series of 2 keys in the software. And they have a few default Revit shortcuts that are really helpful and really useful. And some of them are pretty straightforward. So for instance, if we wanted to start something like creating walls, the keyboard shortcut would be WA. If we wanted to put in a window, it is WD, or a door is DR. So there's a lot of like really common ones that are pretty straightforward. But there are a few Revit keyboard shortcuts that don't exist that frankly should exist in the default of the software. And so one thing I'm going to show you how to do today is how to install a file that will give you all of the customized keyboard shortcuts that I have created. You absolutely don't have to use them. However, it is going to greatly help your workflow, and it will also really help you follow along with the later tutorials if you have the same shortcuts that I have in here. Um, and then lastly, before we go and jump into Revit and just kind of play around with our file, is I have linked up here. This is absolutely not a list of the only places you can go, but this is a list of some really great online YouTube resources for Revit. There is a wonderful community on YouTube of people um, doing some of them. Well, some of them have websites where they give Revit help and they charge money, but many of these people are doing it for free, or rather just doing it for their ad revenue, um, teaching you really intricate things to do in this software. And so these are some of the places that I often will look for when I'm struggling with something in Revit. And I really recommend you follow them to kind of become even better at this software. Especially, I'll give a huge shout out to the Balkan architect. I love this man. This man is the greatest man that has ever lived in the entire world. Um, and his videos on his channel are not only just so fantastically done, but they are really showing all of the different intricacies and all of the various different ways of using the software. So I cannot, I'm just gushing, but I cannot recommend the Balkan Architect enough. If you search for something of how to do it in Revit and you get a video that says it's from him, click on it because it'll have all of your answers in there. And I have just learned so much from this man, and I just love him so much. And so, huge shout out to him. All of these other channels are also, I've learned things from them, but not as much as I have from Milos. He's fantastic. Um, as well as just some great ways that you can, or great videos of just kind of how to do some more visualization things that maybe aren't creating construction documents, but really just creating nice presentation style drawings. Here are just some other great channels out there that I really recommend. So now, before we get too much into everything else, this Miro board here just kind of has some screenshots and notes about using some of the different parts or features or things within Revit. But let's just jump into the software and kind of play around with it. So up on Canvas, I have a link to this sample file here. It's the same one that was in those screenshots. And I'd like for you to download it, and we'll just kind of play around. So feel free to move things, make adjustments, get an error code to pop up, and just to kind of see like how a file looks in here. So I'm going to just download this file. We'll see here that it's an RVT, which is a Revit model or a Revit project. And then mine is just showing to open it up in Revit, so I can click on it to open it. If you have only just recently installed Revit, it might not associate that file just yet. So you can go to your search bar at the bottom and search for Revit. Now, as Revit launches, because I just opened the software, it's going to bring me to my home screen, where it'll show me all of the things I've kind of worked on recently, all of my different models in here. And I'm just going to open up that Sunbeam file. So I'm going to click on Open. I'll go look in my Downloads folder, and then we have here the Sunbeam. If you're using Revit 2027, it might just warn you that it has to upgrade the model, which that's totally fine. It's not going to cause any harm. But here we have that file that we were looking at in this 3D view. So again, we can pan around using just clicking on our scroll wheel like a button will allow us to pan. Holding the shift key and the scroll wheel will allow us to orbit around three-dimensionally around this building. If we wanted to make some changes, we can also zoom in and out just with our scroll wheel by zooming. And then we have that properties panel and that project browser. Anytime I hover over a part or piece of this building, it kind of will highlight each thing. And then if I was to click on something like a window, we'll see our properties panel kind of change and adjust based on that window. To navigate from one view to another, so if I wanted to open up, say, that level 1 floor plan, I could just double click in my project browser and it'll open up my level 1 floor plan. And now I can look at it as a plan view. What's really wonderful is if I am to, I'll go back to my 3D view by just clicking on my 3D view tab here, is we can see, I'll hold shift in the scroll wheel to just orbit around, is I have this bank of 3 windows here and this bank of 3 windows here, and then kind of my front door. And if I go into my floor plan here, we can see those windows there with those symbols. Now, if I decided I didn't want these windows here anymore, I could just click on one and hit delete, click on the other, hit delete, click on the third, hit delete. Not only did my floor plan adjust with how that wall needed to look and that solid fill for that wall, but if I go back into my 3D view, those windows are gone. So deleting them from the floor plan deleted them from the entire model, which would also get rid of them from my elevation views. And like with any software, in order to undo, we're just going to use Control Z to just undo anything we have previously done in there. To open up something like an elevation view, I could just scroll down in my project browser, and if I was to double click, it would open up my elevation view for this view here. And so any change I was to make, let's say in my elevation view, I decide I only want 2 windows, not 3. I could click on one and delete, click on the other and delete. And if I was to go into my level 1 floor plan, it has updated and adjusted to have that update with it. So whatever change you make in whatever view updates throughout the entire model in here. The other thing is that Revit is intuitively knows how stuff is getting connected in here. So if I was to click on this wall, for instance, I get information about this wall type. And if I was to click and drag it out, so I'm just holding and dragging it out, it pulled all of those connecting walls with it, and it kept all of my corners attached. One thing it's warning me about right now, dragging that out in this model, is it says, hey, your highlighted walls were attached to but missed the target. What it's saying there in like weird computer speak is you had your roof attached to this wall, but now you've pulled this wall out and the roof is no longer attached to it. So this is a warning. I can just say okay to it. But sometimes down here you may get errors that you can't just say okay, that you have to like do something to solve in that project. If I wanted to draw another wall to kind of split these rooms in here, I could start the wall tool with keyboard shortcut WA or this button here. And we'll see that I can make options or changes within my properties. So I'm going to just put in an interior wall, and I'll click on my properties panel to just pick an interior wall type. Again, we're just messing around, so no worries. And then we always want to pay attention when we're doing walls to things like our location line of our base constraint and our top constraint. So if I just want to make an interior wall, just splitting this room kind of in half, I want a base constraint of level 1 and a top constraint of up to level 2. Now, a thing with the properties panel that's a little annoying is it has this apply button here. You never actually have to click on that button. Once you move your cursor out, it will apply whatever you're doing. But while you're making a change in here, you have to keep your cursor inside the properties panel. Otherwise, it'll just stop doing whatever you're doing. But I can make a wall go from level 1 to level 2, and then I can just click to start, click to end, and it's going to make that attachment for me automatically. And if I was to try to move this wall, it's going to just move along with it. And if I wanted to put a door in this wall, I can go back into my architecture tab and use this door tool or keyboard shortcut DR, and I can place a door, and it's going to trim that out for me. And I can use these arrows to even flip that door if I needed to adjust which way it swings for us. So the really wonderful thing with Revit is it's going to expedite so many different things because we didn't have to like offset for our wall thickness. It knew that a wall had an inside and an outside, so it did that for us automatically. We don't have to trim for things like our windows or worry even about our line weights when it comes to like our windows because it's taking care of all of our different line weights and layers. It's trimming all of the different things that we would have to go about and trim for. So Revit is really expediting a lot of our processes for us, which is so fantastic and amazing. Feel free to continue to manipulate and move and destroy this sample project as much as you would like. Because again, you're not turning it in. I just wanted to give you something to kind of look at and play around with a little bit in the software. Before we jump into our next piece or our next part, I just want to show you kind of how I like to set up my user interface in this software. So I'm going to hit escape 700,000 times. So that is going to be mark back to our AutoCAD practice there because these are made by the same company. I like my user interface setup where I have a large properties panel on this side and then a large project browser on this side. It's just my personal preference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag the project browser here. And as I'm dragging it, I'm going to drag over to this side, and then I'm going to lock it. Let's see if I can get it to lock. It's a little hard sometimes because I have two screens on open. With my dual screen, sometimes I don't want to lock. There we go. I'm going to lock it onto this side here. So I have a larger project browser and I have a larger properties panel. So it's just kind of giving me a little bit more information that I can see right away. Another thing I really like to do with my user interface, and so that's totally optional. If you want your project browser over here, you can keep it over here. If at any point you accidentally close out of it, if you hit that X accidentally and make it go away, you can always get it back by going to the Insert tab up here. No, just kidding, pranked you. The View tab up here, and then User Interface, and then you could check off the project browser. Or you could right click anywhere in your drawing, browsers, project browser, to turn it on or off. If you ever get rid of your properties panel by accident, so if you click on this little X by accident, no worries, you can get it back using the keyboard shortcut PP. So the keyboard shortcut PP will make the project browser either appear or disappear. My other thing that I like to do with my user interface, which again, this is totally optional, but it's just something that I prefer, is I'm going to switch my user interface into dark mode. And so I'm going to click on File, Options, Colors. Yours might be in dark mode by default because it usually will do based on system settings. And if you have your computer in dark mode, then it'll usually just be in dark mode by default. If yours isn't though, so if I go back into File, Options, and then Colors, you could always just make it go into dark mode automatically. And I just prefer dark mode because it's just a little bit easier on my eyes. However, I do prefer my canvas space in light mode. So I like my toolbar in dark mode, but my canvas in light, which is keyboard shortcut CA to change that canvas color without changing the rest of it. So again, that's CA to change that canvas. These are just, my preferences of how I like my user face to look, but you ultimately can have your user face look however you want. Next, what I'd like to just go over, and then we'll jump into a project where we'll actually make something, is how you can install my keyboard shortcut file so that this way you have the same keyboard shortcuts I do. You only ever have to do this once on your machine, and then once you put it on there, Revit is set up that way. Same thing with this user interface. You only have to kind of drag that over once on that computer, and then the next time you open Revit, it will just bring up the same user interface you had. But what I'm going to do is download my keyboard shortcut file here. You'll see here that it is just this mess of code and nonsense. We can ignore that, that's fine. We'll download this file and we'll download it anyway. I promise you it is not a virus. And if you click on it to open it, that's fine. But again, you'll just see a nonsense of bizarre code. What we're going to do is go back into Revit and we are going to type the command KS for keyboard shortcut to open up our keyboard shortcuts. And then you're going to import. You're going to go look in your downloads folder. And then there is that file there, DBM, that's me, and the year is 2026, and these are my keyboard shortcuts. And so I will open, and I'm going to overwrite the existing keyboard shortcuts, and then I'll click OK. And what that has done is it's just added a couple additional keyboard shortcuts. So there's a few things that now we can do with our keyboard shortcuts. If you want to check if it loaded correctly, if you were to hit 3 it should just open up your 3D view, and we can now see the mess I made, like with my roof over here, by pulling those walls out, by just orbiting around a little bit. But if you were to hit 3 it should open up your 3D view. If you were to type the keyboard shortcut LF, it should open up this load family menu instead of um, giving you an error about lighting fixtures. So again, to load in keyboard shortcuts is the keyboard shortcut KS, and then you can use import to overwrite your keyboard shortcuts. And that's just a very brief dipping our toes, looking at the interface and just talking about some of the capabilities of this software. Our next video will be going over some of those different like parameters and properties and actually building out a quick little model of a building. And then you'll also practice different roof styles and then do a full building kind of from start to finish. And I will talk at you in the next one.